All right, Kevin, we are back. I'm very excited to keep talking about Batman the Animated Series.
Me too.
So, today we have the next episode. I usually watch Batman on Max, but sometimes, whenever I watch One Piece, I use a pirating website, and I looked up if they had Batman the Animated Series, which they did, and the watching order was, it started how you were giving it, not what Max had. So I assume, because after Last Laugh, I think it's a Poison Ivy one.
Yes, Pretty Poison or something like that.
Yes. So I'll be able to keep track of which episodes I'm supposed to be watching.
I have been using Prime, and it is in the right order there, too, so...
Wow.
That's another one if you do have that one or want to check there, too.
Gotcha. Well, I have nothing else to talk about besides Batman, so I'm just going to hop right into it. This episode is called Nothing to Fear. I assumed going into it, especially with the title card, it's like a shadow of a scarecrow. And I was like, the Scarecrow episode. It starts out with a bunch of establishing shots of Gotham, which I really enjoy. What I enjoy about Gotham, at least depicted in Batman the Animated Series, is there's a mood to it, and I appreciate it. It's never like blue skies. It's always nighttime, red skies, or like an orange sky when it's like the daytime. And it's a weird way of describing it, but I do think it's kind of romantic of Gotham, or in explaining or describing Gotham.
Okay, that's an interesting way to think about it. I mean, I know kind of the always joke with Gotham in, like, media is, why is it always dark there? And I never really thought of it in the way you're kind of saying it as romantic, but that is an interesting way to think about it.
I don't know. I feel like Batman always romanticizes the city whenever he explains how much he loves Gotham and like how Gotham is a living thing. Not particularly in this, but in Batman media, if he ever is to explain Gotham. It's like a facial feature that the skies are red sometimes or never quite blue.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. That is interesting.
I did look this up. I kind of knew the difference, but I looked it up to verify it. The establishing shot is of a gargoyle and then it pans the city. And I was like, I know that there is such thing as a grotesque, and there's a difference between a gargoyle and a grotesque. And so I Googled it, and gargoyles are a decorative waterspout, while grotesques serve no purpose. So it's not technically a gargoyle unless it has a real purpose architecturally.
Interesting.
Fun fact.
I did not know that. That is a fun fact.
But there's a helicopter flying through the skies of Gotham with someone dressed up in a costume, but you don't quite see them. It's the Scarecrow. But you do see the lackey, and he's brandishing a gun. And then we cut to Gotham Towers. It has an outdoor elevator, and I was like, that's pretty cool. Whenever I saw Gotham Towers, it gave me, not PTSD, but it gave me, flashbacks or flash forwards to, Wayne Powers, the building.
I guess that is a little foreshadowing there that they probably had no idea about, you know?
No clue. Inside of the building, there's a charity book signing, and there's this banner that says Save the University. You see some rich people dumping a bunch of exposition talking about the recent robberies and vandalisms at Gotham State University, and we're introduced to Dr. Long, who's gathering all of his things and trying to leave the room, and a reporter, Summer Gleason. I'm not sure if it's the same reporter from the last episode.
I think it is. That was one thing I was going to ask you. I don't remember if it was, but I thought it was vaguely when I first heard the name. I wasn't sure if you knew for sure either, but...
I don't know for sure, but I'm going to assume, because continuity.
Yes.
But Summer Gleason is the name of the reporter, and she's trying to get an interview with Dr. Long about the robberies. And as they're headed towards the elevator, Bruce Wayne is sitting by the elevator, and they go into the elevator talking about how if this keeps up, Dr. Long's afraid that students will be afraid to come to campus with the ongoing robberies. And then Bruce Wayne slips into the elevator. I started this episode, right when it got to this area, I was like, oh no, I know exactly what this part of the episode was. I didn't remember a lot of the episode, but I remember the next, minute of this episode. Bruce Wayne slips in unprepared for the roasting he's about to receive. And once he gets inside, you realize that Bruce Wayne knows Summer, and then he introduces himself to Dr. Long, and then we cut back to the helicopter where we're actually showing the Scarecrow. There's only so much you can do with a Scarecrow, aesthetically, I guess.
Yeah.
I think he looks kind of goofy, but he does his job.
He does. That's one thing I kind of wanted to mention while we were on that. So I know they made that second series after this, the New Adventures of Batman and Robin, and they updated a lot of the looks of the villains, and Scarecrow is one who got a much-needed update. And then I saw this, and I'm like, that's not how I remember him looking. And then I kind of looked up, I was like, oh yeah, he got the update and looks much less goofy in the future. So, I mean, I guess it's something to look forward to, but I was on the same page with the kind of goofiness of the first iteration of Scarecrow here.
I am currently Googling it because I want to see what it looks like. So give me 1 second.
I got you.
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
Much, much better.
Yeah, like the straw for hair.
Yeah, and then you can see his eyes.
Yeah, that was the Scarecrow I remembered from this show, and then that thing slinked in, and I was like, what am I looking at?
Thing indeed.
Yeah, he did look very... Goofy's a good word.
So, once we're showing the Scarecrow, and they're in the helicopter, and they're approaching somewhere, we cut back to the conversation in the elevator. Dr. Long does not shake his hand as Bruce extends it out, and then he just starts to monologue at him. I wrote down the quote, "Your father and I attended university together. He had big plans for you." And then Bruce Wayne thinks that he'd be pleased because the company's prospering. And then Dr. Long rebuttals, "Pleased? When your father was alive, Wayne was a name that commanded great respect. It's lucky your father didn't live to see what you've done to his good name. He'd have died of shame." And then he leaves, and I was like, wow.
And then for me, it was at that point when I clicked into which one this one was. Because I always remembered the scene at the end that I'm guessing we'll get into for sure, but that is the scene that's like always stuck with me from this one. And as soon as he said that, I was like, oh, we're going this route this quickly, which is kind of crazy. I always thought it was much later when it tackles the whole Bruce's parents and thinking he's a failure thing.
I think I do know what scene you're talking about, and we are going to get to it.
Oh, yeah.
But Dr. Long exits the elevator, and Summer explains that he's probably taking out his frustrations on Bruce, and then he's left in the elevator alone, and then you just see Bruce just sink into the corner of the elevator and just kind of look down, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. It hit a little harder than I feel like it should have.
Yeah, like that part, I was like, oh wow. I was like, this is the third episode of this show that's meant for children, and they're just like, Bruce thinks he's a failure and is not okay mentally. Deal with that for a little bit. I was like, oh wow.
Marinate.
Yeah, because it's not like outright in your face, like Bruce was like, yeah, I think he's right, but like, you know, you watch it and you're like, oh, Bruce thinks he's right. Like, he got knocked down a few pegs there and was trying not to think through all of that till someone else brought it up.
It's crazy how out of the blue that attack was upon Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
He was no more than 3 sentences into the episode, and then he got roasted, and I was like, ouch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just like, wow, he's really going for the jugular there. That's the last thing Bruce wanted to hear right there.
So Bruce notices that there's a helicopter outside, and it drops on top of the university bank, and then the Batman theme plays, and I was like, ooh. And we transition to the guard inside of the bank, and he's reading a Tiny Toons comic.
I saw that.
Which is a throwback, because Tiny Toons.
Mm-hmm.
And also, way to plug your own brand, WB, having a character inside your show read something else.
At that point, I like saw that and I was like, oh yeah, those just aired on the same networks when these were both new, and they were probably in some, I don't know if they were back to back or anything, but they, you know, you could probably catch reruns of both of these shows at any point back to back. I mean, that's kind of crazy.
So the guard's reading the Tiny Toons comic until the ceiling explodes and it blasts him out the chair. The Scarecrow and his goons drop in. The guard tries to apprehend them, but then the Scarecrow unleashes. They don't say it until later into the episode. Bruce coins fear toxin, but I'm going to refer to it as fear toxin. The Scarecrow unleashes his fear toxin, revealing the guard's fear of spiders. This is leading into a bigger thing that I want to talk to you about. The goons question what Scarecrow did, and he explains that he helped the guard, quote-unquote, visualize his innermost fear, which is arachnophobia. And then the goons can't pronounce the word, and then he starts yelling at them. And the guard just kind of like scrambles on the ground as he's trying to scratch the spiders that he's seeing off of him. Scarecrow is a pretty whack villain for Batman, because the fact that he's figured out some sort of chemical that he can use on you to make you just visualize your worst fears, horrendous.
So how did that scene make you feel? Because I know you're a spiders guy.
Oh, horrible. Because later on, they show more examples of things. I feel like it becomes 10 times worse if it's just imaginary. Because if it's real, you can smash it. If it's all in your head, you're stuck in a loop, and that's whack.
Yeah, that scene made me uncomfy, and I don't mind spiders normally, and I like watched them like, oh, like I can feel those crawling on my skin watching this. I'm like, wow, I really hate that.
I think it was made worse when Scarecrow and his goons were just having casual conversation as the dude was on the ground just like squirming around. I was like, oh no.
Tasty.
But what I wanted to talk about, it relates to the Batman movie, Robert Pattinson's Batman, the discussion between goons and henchmen, because I was watching this, I was like, oh, these are goons, not henchmen, because goons are just kind of like hired thugs, and henchmen believe in the cause. Because in the Batman, you get to see around Gotham, there are thugs, just like organized thugs that get up to shenanigans. And then as Riddler develops throughout the movie, he reaches out to more people, and more people also believe in his cause, kind of dress up like him and show up to do like the end fight scene in the Batman.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's really cool. That movie really delineated the idea of a goon and a henchman.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I've never thought of that, but you're absolutely right, because there's that scene at the start where Pattinson, as I will lovingly call him, beats the goons viciously. I was like, oh wow, I'm like, they're just kids, they're just kind of vibing, they're just here because they don't have anything else they can do. It's like, that's crazy. And then at the end, he was equally savage to them, and like, I think that was part of his character, that he learned some stuff there, but still, that's an interesting delineation.
There are a lot of points throughout this episode that gave me very strong the Batman vibes and parallels, which I will point out as we go along, but this was the first.
I got you.
Scarecrow and his goons head into the vault, and we cut to Batman arriving to witness the explosion at the bank of them busting open the vault door. They only name one of the goons. There are two of them. There's Nigel, and there's just the other guy that they do not refer to specifically. And I was like, dang. So Nigel is told to stand guard while the other two head inside. Scarecrow tells the other guy to take what he can and to burn the rest because this is about revenge. And I was like, ooh, motivation. And Scarecrow begins to spread gasoline all over the room. As the other goon, I need a name to call him so I don't mix them up.
So what I was saying with Prime, if you ever like swipe up or like, you know, do the thing where the bar at the bottom will come up, it like gives you random facts and who's playing whoever is in that scene. And I did happen to look, and that goon does have a name in the credits, and his name is Anthony.
Fascinating, because I was trying really hard.
So yes, so it's Nigel and Anthony.
Okay, so as I was explaining, Nigel is told to stand watch, and Scarecrow and Anthony venture inside. Scarecrow tells Anthony to take as much money as he can fit on his person and burn the rest because this is about revenge. And so Anthony shoves his pockets full of cash until Nigel from outside cries for help because he's being assaulted by the Batman. And Scarecrow now I have to substitute the other guy. Scarecrow tells Anthony to hide on top of the shelves and wait for a signal. Nigel is thrown into the vault. Scarecrow reaches into his bag, and he throws out 2 capsules of fear toxin at the entrance, but Batman enters wearing a gas mask, meeting for the first time. Scarecrow gives the Batman speech as they're being introduced to one another. Batman asks who he is, and Scarecrow's like, I am fear incarnate. I am the terror of Gotham. I am the Scarecrow. That gives me, again, the Batman vibes of the parallel between Batman and the Riddler throughout that movie.
So I know one thing you said that I also kind of noticed and was thinking about. It makes it very clear that this is the first time they're meeting, which part one of that is Batman coming in with the gas mask. At first, I was like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Why would he know to be wearing a gas mask? Which, there are a couple reasons I can think there. A, you have the guard outside who's probably still wriggling around fighting the spiders, and he probably noticed it, was like, something's up there. And B, it could just be Batman being like, I'm gonna be prepared, because he's Batman.
That's a superpower.
Yeah, and then the second sort of thing with that is it's also made it clear this is not Scarecrow's first time striking or whatever, but it's the first time he meets Batman. And I'm like, so you're saying Batman isn't at every little crime in Gotham? I was like, that's interesting, because, you know, one of the kind of criticisms of Batman is always like, oh, he thinks he can do everything, blah, 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 and all of this. And I'm like, well, here you can see if it's small crimes like that, Batman doesn't bother till it starts to escalate. That just makes it feel more real in this case, and I'm glad they kind of subtly did that.
In On Leather Wings, they also kind of allude to that because Batman brings up that the Man-Bat had struck at other places previously, but he hadn't been to those places. So I think that is a really cool detail.
Batman, always prepared.
Always prepared. After Scarecrow gives the Batman speech, he lights the torch, and Batman approaches Scarecrow, but the other goon jumps down from on top of the shelf, and they start to fight. Batman loses his gas mask in the struggle, and then the Scarecrow shoots him with a dart with the fear toxin. And I was like, oh, you dirty, dirty man. Batman. Batman stumbles towards the Scarecrow, which makes the Scarecrow drop the torch, and it starts a fire from the gasoline trails. You see Batman is still able to, like, kind of manhandle Scarecrow because he shoves him into a wall, but he's not strong enough to follow through with it. He starts to drop to his knees, and he tears off a piece of the Scarecrow's suit, but the Scarecrow realizes that the toxin is starting to take effect on him, and the Scarecrow wonders what hidden terror keeps the Batman awake at night, but before he can find out, he has to bail because the place is on fire, and then he abandons Batman in the vault. Batman stumbles towards the exit. He's trying to escape, but he falls on his knees and begins to hallucinate his dad within the flames. This reminds me of another Cartoon Network cartoon where a character is hallucinating and he sees in a fire a mirage of his dad. In the 5th season, the last season of Samurai Jack was canceled in the early 2000s, and then it came back for a final season in like 2020, I think. Something like that.
Yes.
And the first few episodes, you see that Jack has kind of gone crazy because he's stuck in the future. There are no more portals back to the past, and he's just been living there for the past like 50 plus years. He lost his sword. He's lost all hope, and he's just kind of surviving. And like every corner, there's an imaginary version of Jack that's basically telling him, one of the lines is something along the lines of, the only honorable thing for us left to do is, and then Jack cuts him off, and he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And I was like, oh. But one of the things he sees is while he's setting up camp, he's starting a fire to eat food, and then the fire starts to burn a little brighter, and then he looks into the river beside him, and then he sees a bunch of dead bodies in the river. Then he looks back at the fire and he sees the crucified like corpses of the people he left behind, and then his dad's like, you have failed us, like you've forgotten your purpose. And I was like, oh my gosh. But this is a much scaled down version of that. Still, it evoked the same feeling from me, which I feel like is still a lot, because he sees his father in the flames, and Thomas just repeats that you have failed me and that you have disgraced the family name, and Batman just collapses.
That one, the part that stood out to me was how he was just hammering home like failure, using the word failure, like failed. I was like, oh wow. A lot of different media tries to tackle the fear of failure, and normally they're like, oh, we're gonna be subtle and whatever, and this was just like, you know what? No, you failed. You are a failure. You failed me, and you are bad because of this. I was like, oh, they're just going straight out. There's no subtlety here. It's right on the head. You failed. You are a failure, and that makes you bad.
Bruce Wayne wasn't prepared for this day when he woke up that morning.
Not at all.
But the sprinklers turn on and the mirage starts to fade as the fire goes down. But Batman asks him to wait, and then the fire disappears. Batman cowers, and he's the smallest. I think it's cool because you see him as a big brooding figure, and he's usually like a stiff, angular figure. And then in this moment, he's like very small and round as he's kind of like almost fetus position towards the floor. And I was like, oh my gosh. Batman didn't have to say, wow, I feel like a failure. They showed it with no words, which is impressive.
Yeah, honestly, yes.
So the police arrive and they see Batman stumbling out of the vault, and he tells the police that it was the Scarecrow, and the previously fear-stricken guard corroborates the story until Bullock walks in, and I was like, oh my gosh. And Bullock walks in to start problems with Batman and calling him stuff like the commissioner's pet bat, and refers to him as a vigilante and accuses him of withholding police evidence. And then Bullock tries to shove Batman, but it looks more like a nudge because he pushes him back a little bit, but then Batman just shoves him back like 4 times as far, and then Bullock's like, all right, so you want to get ugly with this, and he reaches for his gun, and then Gordon walks in. I love Gordon.
You know, I want your thoughts on this because I couldn't quite figure out what it was saying, but that shove from Batman, to me, it could have been doing one of two things. That A, Batman is not fully in control right now because of the fear toxin, that he was going way harder than he needed to, or B, he was showing Bullock that even with fear toxin in his system, he can still beat him with one hand tied behind his back.
I think it might be the first, but a little of the second part, because maybe it's a little bit of him trying to prove to himself, like, if I was a failure, would I be able to do this or something? Yeah. I think it's the childish part of Batman's brain, but I definitely think it's more so the fear toxin still working, because he doesn't reveal anything about the fear toxin to them.
Yeah.
So,
because my first thought was, oh, he's still a little out of it, because I feel like that's not a very Batman thing to do, to just push him like that. And then I was like, or is he trying to be like, I'm him, don't test me type thing? But I'm like, that also doesn't feel very Batman.
I think his entire ideology was just stumbling because of, within maybe 20 minutes, he had been called a failure and referred to as a failure multiple times.
Yeah. once by his own mind and once by someone else too, so you can't just be like, it's just the gas. He's like, oh no, he was right.
So Bullock refers to Batman as Zorro and says that he was withholding evidence, but as they turn around to see Batman, all they see is the smoke pouring out of the vault, and I'm like, yes, classic Batman.
You caught that Zorro reference though, which I thought was fun.
Fun is a funny way to describe any sort of reference to Batman and Zorro, because that's really where it all starts with the movie he goes to see with his parents.
I also thought part of it too is like Bruce can't catch a break at that moment. You know, he's just been told twice by an old friend of his father and his hallucination of his father that he's a failure. So he's probably like, I just want to clear my head, whatever. And then Bullock's like, oh, do you remember that movie you went and watched when your father died? And I was like, wow, they're just pouring it on Bruce right now. He could not be good.
Nothing but the best hits. So we cut to some lab or warehouse with a helicopter outside. So I'm like, Scarecrow. As Scarecrow and his goons watch the news, and it's Summer discussing the emergence of the Scarecrow. Scarecrow admits to underestimating Batman, which I appreciate because Batman showed up with unless he had been looking into Scarecrow sooner, which I don't think so because he didn't know who he was when he walked in, but he did show up with a gas mask. And I'm like, with zero context, he was already prepared to take out Scarecrow. But the Scarecrow is at least satisfied with the fact that he has quote unquote finished the university successfully. And the goons, while cleaning themselves up, are like, well, we never liked school, but why do you hate it so much? And while they're trying to figure out why the Scarecrow hates school so much, they're like, were you thrown out for not being smart enough? I'm like, dang. But the Scarecrow starts to expand on his background.
He's monologuing.
Yes, he starts to monologue. He was a professor. He taught psychology. He specialized in phobias. Inducing terror has always intrigued me. And then there's a flashback of him as a very, very ugly child. And he was scaring schoolgirls with snakes. And I'm like, how'd you get those in here? Were they in your pants? Were they in your shirt? Like, I don't know.
I mean, this was 90s public school. There was probably a lot of things that got in.
Different time. But he says, people, animals, it was all the same. As soon as I heard that line, I was like, you were experimenting on animals too? You're a freak.
In that flashback too, you haven't gotten there yet, but when it cuts forward to him using, it looked like the basement of the school, him just torturing people down there with their fears. I'm like, that's crazy. I'm like, how do you sign up for this as a research subject and not know?
He becomes obsessed with finding out what scares people as we see him experimenting on students locked in rooms, experiencing their greatest fears, like the girl covered in bugs or the boy covered in rats. And I was like, again, was that the basement? Like, where was this happening that no one saw this?
I think I might be wrong here. I don't fully remember, but the sort of last student torture we see, it's the rat one. And I think you can kind of see him start to let in what I'm guessing turned into his fear gas, because I think there's some gas in the room. And I'm like, is he testing this out? Or are the rats even real? I was like, what's going on? I felt very trippy watching that.
And that's really cool. I appreciate how unsettled I felt while watching it, because yes, we're given the answers of he experimented on people, probably, with the fear toxin, and that's how he developed it, but a lot of it is left vague enough for you to go, that's still really weird and creepy to think about. But due to these experiments, Dr. Long, the guy earlier in the episode, Dr. Long is on the board, and he gets him kicked out of the university, and we cut to Nigel and Anthony reacting. Nigel's reading the newspaper, and Anthony's like, you were really a professor? And I was like, shut up, Anthony. But Nigel's reading the newspaper, and on it says University Museum benefit tonight, and it transitions to the newspaper on the desk of Bruce Wayne with a picture of his parents, and the TV is on in the background. Bruce is at the Batcomputer, which is interesting. It wasn't Batman. So far, we've seen Batman using all of his technology. It hasn't been Bruce Wayne doing stuff for Batman. And
Bruce looks rough.
He looks rough. He has like a little 5 o'clock shadow going on.
Yeah.
At least in the comics, I'm always a big fan of never bearded Batman, but I like stubbly Batman.
Okay.
Because anytime I see stubbly Batman, I'm like, he's going through something rougher than usual right now, and he hasn't had the time to clean himself.
Stubbly Batman does mean struggling Batman.
Yes. But I think it's fun that usually there are the separate identities of Bruce Wayne and Batman, but in this one scene, because his mental structure has been tampered with, I already find it bizarre to see Bruce Wayne at the Batcomputer working, because it's usually Batman at the Batcomputer working, which is why I know something's up with his head right now. Another just subtle thing. You can still see that Bruce is shaken from his hallucination, and it's really sad. It's kind of like a kicked puppy or something. With a trembling hand, he reaches out for the picture of his parents, and all he hears is his dad saying over and over, "You failed me, son." And then he just shakily puts it back just face down on the table. And I was like, oh no.
What we didn't know at this point, but you find out pretty quickly in the next scene whenever they show up to the benefit of Batman faces off with Scarecrow. Scarecrow's like, oh, my timed release fear toxin from that dart or whatever. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. Up until that point, Scarecrow had just been spraying the gas in people's faces. Once they're out, they'll start to be good. But he injected his serum into Batman's bloodstream and made it a timed release, so it was constantly going still, probably from the point it happened, literally up to whenever he sees Scarecrow again the next day. So that had to be a rough 24 hours for Bruce.
And I imagine that it was intentional that when he shoots Batman, he shot him in the back of the neck. And I'm like, oh, brainstem area. I was like, spine area. That's going to be in his system for a while. And if not for a while, it's going to efficiently get into his system.
Yeah.
But after Bruce sets the picture down, he starts watching the TV, and it's Summer again, reporting about the break-in, and begins to repeat herself about how Batman wasn't able to apprehend the criminals, and that Batman failed to catch the perpetrators, failed, and then it zooms in on her saying failed over and over again as it looks at the camera, and then Alfred comes and turns off the TV, snapping Bruce out of the little trance. I love Alfred Pennyworth. As a comic reader, it's been tough for a while, because Mr. Alfred's been dead for quite some time.
Yeah, I'm still mad. They're not mad. It's good for comics to have stake. It makes you actually realize what you missed. But, oh boy, seeing stuff like this does make me miss a good Alfred Pennyworth.
Should have just Jason Todded them. Yeah, take out another Robin. You shouldn't have taken Alfred. Take Damian, please.
Jason Todd as a verb is crazy.
But I love Alfred. I think I'm kind of biased because the people that I usually listen to for comic-related content, one of them is Comic Pop, and the main guy, Sal, talks a lot about how he's a very simple Batman fan. He wants a mystery. He wants Batman and Alfred in the Batcave, and they work together. Not like Alfred goes out with him, but it's the two of them versus the world. And then at the end of the adventure, Batman comes back and he has like dinner brought to him by Alfred, and they wrap it all up. And I'm not as traditional as that for Batman, but I definitely understand what he means. It's a very safe Batman story.
Yeah.
But Alfred turning off the television snaps Bruce out of his daze, and Alfred starts to remark about how crazy it is for somebody to be dressing up and frightening people in a costume, running around. I'm being a crazy person. And I'm like, har, 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 you're trying to stab at Batman. But I know that he was joking about it, but Alfred doesn't know that this is the incorrect time for this.
Yeah, there's a time and place, and it is not now, friend.
Bruce Wayne wants to know why Scarecrow wants to destroy the university, and Alfred rebuttals that maybe he flunked phys ed, and I'm like, har, har. And Alfred immediately after that realizes that something's up with Bruce, and he asks if he's feeling okay, and then Bruce reveals that he's been drugged by the Scarecrow with a sort of fear toxin, which is where he finally coins it, and he never knows when it's going to hit him. He's been hallucinating about his dad, saying that Bruce is shaming the family name, and then as Bruce is saying this, he like walks over to the edge of the cavern of the Batcave. He's just like looking down to the chasm. He's informing Alfred that he's convinced that he is shaming his family name, and then Alfred grabs him by the shoulder and tells him that it's rubbish and that his father would be proud of him because Alfred's proud of him. And I was like, aww. He says, you need chicken soup and a good night's rest. And then they head off to bed. I was like, oh.
That'll get you every time.
And then he's like, Alfred? He's like, yes, Master Wayne. He said, thank you. And I'm like, aw. Yeah, I wrote what a great guy. But we go to the museum, which was hinted at in the newspaper. The rich are making their contributions towards the university, and Dr. Long is there, collecting them. Somebody points out in the room that there's gas coming from the ventilation system, and then Scarecrow and his goons enter the museum with gas masks and guns. They enter, and they steal the money from Dr. Long, and they also drug him, as well as exposing his fear of dying. Most depictions I've seen in television shows of the fear of dying is fairly simple, and I think it's good enough for him to just like look at his hands starts to get old and turn to skeletons, and he just starts panicking because he's old. And I'm like, fair, it's a fair fear. There's a show I watched forever ago on Amazon Prime. It's called Undone, and I'm not even going to try and explain the plot. Maybe I'll talk to you later about it, but there's a scene where it's a very trippy show, and there's a scene where the main character, she's in the hospital because she got into a bad accident, and her brain's not working right, and she's remembering and experiencing moments in her present life out of order because someone comes in to talk to her about a conversation that we as the audience haven't seen her have, but she has already actually had the conversation because it happens like right afterwards, and something is left in the room that was in the room before she got there. It was weird. It's just weird. But the mom of the main character sits down in the chair, and then she starts like looking at her mom, and she comments about how much older she's gotten, and then the mom just starts this cycle of she like grows really, really old, and then she turns to a skeleton, then she turns to dust, and from the dust a baby is born, and it just keeps repeating that cycle, and I'm like, that's freaky. No, that's what I get into. Mr. Batman got me into horror. I know I really enjoy horror because of Batman. It's like Batman and Twilight Zone. That's why I like horror now as an adult.
Oh, I never really thought about that, but yeah, I can see it.
I've tangented long enough. But Scarecrow brings Dr. Long with them to torture him while everybody else in the room is going nutso. Batman finally enters the room and he grapples Scarecrow's foot as he's escaping up the stairwell, which Scarecrow admits surprises him. He reveals that he expected Batman to be home experiencing the time-release fear toxin. And I'm like, how long did you have to work on this to be able to create something that will be in your system but only activates when, I assume, things trigger it? Because, and it may not be the same thing every time, because later on it triggers again, but it's not because anything to do with his dad, just something else happens that is fear related. And I'm like, that's just a crazy concept.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying too. Like, how long has Bruce just been cycling through this for whatever triggers it, you know?
But after Scarecrow talks to Batman, Batman begins to look around and watches as the populace is afraid of him. And then they start to go crazy because they think a giant bat is attacking them. And they all just like jump Batman. And Scarecrow is able to escape up the stairs and onto the roof. Batman escapes the crowd. He grapples out of the crowd and also heads towards the roof where he sees a blimp, and there's a hose connected to the ventilation system. As the blimp flies off, the hose pops out of the ventilation system, and that's how Batman hops on to climb towards the blimp. Also, this is the second aerial climax we've had in these past few episodes of Batman.
Correct. I also noticed that and thought it was interesting.
So far, it almost feels like a trend. While we're not going to talk about The Last Laugh, which is the next episode, it's Air Battle, Joker. Air Battle, Joker. And the next is going to be Poison Ivy. And I don't know what's after that, but
it's not Joker after that.
Well, they had a good thing going for them while it lasted.
They did.
So Batman climbs up towards the blimp, and Scarecrow is inside gloating, claiming that he's killed the Batman. And Anthony points out, if he's killed the Batman, then who's climbing up the blimp? And then you see Batman, and Scarecrow gives Anthony a gun, and he's like, deal with the Batman. And Anthony climbs up on top of the blimp, starts to shoot at Batman, and he counters by throwing a batarang into his hand. And I was like, youch. He drops the gun because of it, and the batarang just like sticks in his hand. I'm like, that's a ninja star, but shaped in a bat. That hurt. Batman counters with a batarang to the hand, forcing Anthony to drop the gun. They begin to wrestle over the gun, and they start to shoot the gun wildly into the blimp, causing the controls to catch on fire. Scarecrow orders Nigel to do something, but Nigel's like, not me, you're the genius. And I'm like, dang, that's true. And Nigel also points out that they're headed towards a skyscraper. And as he points that out, they graze the side of the blimp, almost crashing head on into the skyscraper, but the blimp does take damage, and Batman and the other goon fall off. Batman grapples onto the front of the blimp. At the front of the blimp, there's a little antenna, and Batman is able to grapple onto the antenna. He tries to grab Anthony, but he misses, and Anthony falls. And I'm like, if this wasn't a children's show, Batman, you just killed somebody. Anthony falls onto an awning in front of the skyscraper, and the blimp begins to descend as the Scarecrow and Nigel attempt to put out the flames inside the blimp. They watch Batman climb towards the front, the little antenna, and Nigel's worried about it, but Scarecrow believes that the fear toxin will be able to deal with Batman. As Batman reaches the front of the blimp, he begins to hallucinate again about his father. And this is what I meant, because he looks down and you see the street really far from him, and then it gets really close and very far again. And then he starts to hallucinate about his dad. So is it just mild anxieties or smaller scares trigger it? It's funny to just theorize about it, I guess.
Yeah.
A large specter of Thomas Wayne looms over Batman, and he shifts from a scary big Thomas Wayne to a skeleton, just calling him a disgrace. And Batman has had enough. Batman is done with it, and he realizes that after Alfred reaffirmed his position as the Crown Prince of Gotham, he declares, and he does the Batman speech, and I'm like, yeah, you better do it. He's like, I am not a disgrace. I am vengeance. I am the knight. I am Batman. I'm like, yes!
Mm-hmm. That scene, that is the scene that we referenced earlier. Whenever Kevin Conroy died last year, and I was like sad because it happened in the middle of the day, so I was out with friends, and I'm like, oh my guys, I don't think you get how sad I am right now. And they're like, why? Because he is Batman. And they were like, how can a guy doing the voice be Batman? I'm like, let me play you this clip. So I found the clip, and I'm like, tell me any other actor, any of the live action ones, have them read this line to you and tell me this wouldn't give you the same feeling. And they were like, okay, I can see your point, but you're still a massive nerd. I was like, whatever.
You don't understand me.
It's not a phase, man.
It's just really cool. I didn't remember that this happens in this episode because as soon as Scarecrow did it, I was like, wait, I haven't even seen Batman make the speech yet. I was kind of up in arms about it, but I was very happy to hear him say it. But he conquers his fears. He starts to hoist himself higher upon the antenna, and then with the rope, he swings towards the windows of the blimp, smashing his way inside. Nigel tries to stop Batman. During their struggle, they smash into the controls, which cause the blimp to veer into another building, and the Scarecrow decides to shoot Batman with another dart, but he throws Nigel in front of it, who begins to hallucinate prison walls closing in around him, and I'm like, Nigel, sit with me. If your greatest fear is going back to prison and you're out here doing the same thing you're doing that made you end up in prison, like, why are you doing it? Like, come on, man. You're doing this to yourself.
Yeah, that's a pretty valid point that I didn't really think of, that he's doing the one thing that is most likely to set him back to his greatest fear.
Most of the other characters we have seen the fears of, Batman, out of his control. His parents are murdered. Someone who's afraid of spiders, it's probably also out of their control. But his was freaking prison walls. And I'm like, go work at a grocery store. Go be a bagger. Come on.
Go to McDonald's or something.
Go to McDonald's.
Come on.
McGotham's. Have it your way. As Nigel continues to hallucinate, he jumps out of the blimp and lands on a tree. Again, if this wasn't a children's show, that's another dead body. But Scarecrow, as Batman turns around, the camera pans around, and Scarecrow's just chilling in a seat like Thanos or something. And I'm like, what are you doing? I was like, you're about to get punched. And
then he looks goofy still.
Yes, you realize that it's a part of an escape craft. And then he flees. And he's like, bye, Batman, deal with this and deal with the doctor. And Batman has to deal. And so he just grabs the doctor and he jumps out of the blimp as the blimp crashes into a building and blows up. The amount of collateral damage. Crazy. The collateral damage argument is one of the few things I can hold against Mr. Batman, and I like how there is a book, The White Knight, where they bring it up, the amount of damage and destruction he causes, because that's a very good point. While this wasn't his fault, I can't blame this blimp crashing into the building on Batman. He was trying to stop it to the best of his ability, and he didn't even know the blimp was a part of the equation until it was like a platforming game or something, and the camera rises with you, and then you get to the next level, and there's a blimp now, and he's like, well, I guess I gotta deal with this now.
Yeah, no, that's pretty fair. I don't know, I feel like this version of Batman at least tends to be better than some of the other ones we see later and have gotten before. But no, you're absolutely right with the collateral damage, and White Knight is a great comic and should be read by many, many people.
You heard the man. Go out there, the author and artist, his name is Sean Gordon Murphy, and find the White Knight. It's incredible. The Joker becomes sane. He files a court case against the Batman.
Yeah, and then Nightwing joins the cops. It's crazy.
It is crazy. Well, dang. I guess now a tangent. There's a sequel for The White Knight, which is the Azrael one, which I personally haven't read.
I have not read that one yet.
I haven't read the Azrael one. I own it, but I have read the third one because it was The White Knight Beyond, and I'm like, I need this.
Ooh, okay. I have just read The White Knight, the base story.
Beyond one, it's so cool because I was like, Terry McGinnis. It's really fun. Terry is working with powers, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But Terry doesn't know any better as he's doing it. You find out that Jason Todd was the first Robin in this universe, and I'm like, that's also interesting, which is why Dick has such a problem with Batman throughout the series.
Interesting.
It's a cool read, and you get to see the Batman Beyond suit. Amazing. I'm going back to this episode.
Yeah.
So, after Batman jumped out of the blimp, he pulls out a little remote and he clicks a button and it summons the Batmobile. I'm like, that's pretty cool. As he gets into the Batmobile and starts headed towards wherever, the Batcomputer shows him that it has finished analyzing the Scarecrow's mask, revealing that the fabric was manufactured by 5 corporations: Axis Engineering, Bio Laboratories, Crane Chemicals, Mercurity Manufacturing, and Star Labs. And pause, Star Labs, that's a really cool inclusion.
Correct.
They didn't have to. They made up most of the rest, but we got a Star Labs. Batman tells the computer to cross-reference the employees of the Gotham State University with the chemical labs, leaving one Jonathan Crane, owner of Crane Chemicals, a former professor in psychology, specialty in fear and phobias, etc. And then Batman smiles and says bingo as he heads towards the conclusion of the episode, with another awesome shot of the Batmobile driving over a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
We cut to the hideout of the Scarecrow with the crashed escape craft, which I assume is the Crane Chemicals building. It doesn't show any words, but I assume it is, because Jonathan Crane owns Crane Chemicals. Inside, Scarecrow is whining. He unmasks himself, and he's complaining about, oh, woe is me, Batman got in my way, I could have been able to, if it weren't for these meddling kids, practically.
Pretty much.
But he realizes that some of his tanks of fear toxin were seeping out into the room, and then the lights cut off. And then he starts sweating and panicking as he sees a giant bat hallucination. He's scared of the Batman now because of the amount of times he's been heckled by this man. And then he bumps into the real thing, skulking in the shadows. And I think it looks, to me, is the coolest shot I've seen so far in this show. And it's just Batman in the shadows. And I personally believe that Batman looks the coolest when he is drawn or depicted with as little detail as possible.
Yeah, so that little hallucination flash to him just standing, first off, that human bat thing was freaky. I did not like that. It was this and another part in the next episode, The Last Laugh, where he just stands with that costume, and I'm like, yeah, this is the Batman costume when I think of Batman costumes. I'm like, the simple logo, simple one color, really. You might have different colored gloves and boots, and then the cowl cape combo. I'm like, that's all you need to have a good Batman costume. It doesn't need to be anything crazy. This is the Batman costume when I think of Batman in my head.
Don't overcomplicate it.
Beautiful.
The only time I've been a fan of a tampered with kind of suit design, I really like the Scott Snyder earlier Batman outfit because he has like purple gloves. A lot of his suits like padding, which I enjoy, but the purple gloves is just a throwback to the original Batman suit from like the 40s or whenever it came out because he had purple gloves. And I'm like, that's cool. And he had like dumb longer ears. It's funny because it's a much more serious Batman, but he looks a little goofier because that's how he started. Again, as I've brought up, I'm gonna mess this up. I'm thinking really hard. The Dark Knight Returns? That's the book?
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
While I don't like how it looks in the book, because I really don't like the art, I do like the Ben Affleck metal suit. I also like his normal suit. I like how big he looks.
I've always leaned more towards the more nimble Batman than a big, thick Batman.
I think as he gets older, he should be a bigger Batman.
Correct.
And he was supposed to have been Batman for like 20 plus years. So I'm just like, cool. That was like big Batman. But no, I understand the smaller nimble because I really like the Pattinson one.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I've tangented us again. Back to action. That's from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. But he bumps into the Batman, and Batman questions if Crane can handle his own medicine as the Scarecrow begins to hallucinate a gargoyle as the Batman. And it really reminds me, have you seen Fantasia or Fantasia 2000?
Yeah. Yes, Night on Bald
Yes.
Mountain?
Yes. It reminded me of the demon from the Night on Bald Mountain. I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah, I totally see that.
But after that, Batman captures the Scarecrow, and it cuts to the funniest part of this episode for me. Bullock is complaining to the commissioner. He's claiming that Batman's working with Scarecrow, and that he bet his badge that they're in cahoots, and all Gordon does is kind of clear his throat and point at the ceiling fan, where the Scarecrow is hanging from one of the blades with a little Batman note on him. Bullock's the punk.
Really?
At the very end of the episode, we cut to Bruce Wayne, and he has flowers in his hand, and he's at the grave of his parents. He's wearing shades and a trench coat, and I'm like, you look really cool. And then his shadow turns to the Batman, and I'm like, that's also really cool. And then the episode finishes.
Yes.
I think it's a really cool episode. It's a really solid episode. It's a really good introduction to the Scarecrow. Again, as I said in the previous episode, this character has nothing to do with Batman. He has his own agenda, and he just happens to start screwing up things in Gotham.
That's kind of what I think the theme is going to be for this. I say think, but I know because it's been out for almost 30 years at this point. That's crazy.
Know that.
When I said that out loud, I almost said 20. And I went, no, that's 30 years ago. And I went, oh, wow. Okay. Anyway, I know that's kind of the theme for the church chunk, that they'll walk you through all these villains, and it's kind of like, they're just doing their own thing, and Batman's just here, and he's like, you punks are gonna make my life hard today, aren't you? Like, Joker's his main thing, and all these other guys are just side quests, and he's like, you guys are gonna make my life hard today. Thanks for that.
I was trying to think of a comic with the Scarecrow in it that I've read personally, and I couldn't think of one. I know that recently there was an event called Fear State, which was a Scarecrow thing, but I personally didn't read it. But off the top of my head, I can't really think of a Scarecrow story.
The only one that I think of, which it's not a comic book, it's Arkham Knight. That's a Scarecrow story. It wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. You're right, there isn't really a lockdown Scarecrow story. You would have figured for long Halloween, they would have tried to do Scarecrow. I don't remember exactly. It's been a while since I've read that one. I think Scarecrow's the red herring in that one for a long time.
Yeah.
But he was just kind of vibing. I don't think he actually really did anything. He was just kind of like there. And Batman keeps being like, I know you're doing it. And he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I think that's long Halloween. I might be completely mixed up here.
Hot take. I also hate the art in Long Halloween.
Okay, that's fair. I agree with that one. It took me so long to actually read it because I would start and be like, I can't look at this. I don't like it.
That was me. One of my friends I work with, Jimmy, was like, hey, around Halloween, we should read the Long Halloween, then we can talk about it. And I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. And I picked it up so many times. I would get like X amount in. I was like, I can't look at this anymore.
Yeah, I started and stopped a lot, and I, at one point, just kind of I set a few hours up, and I'm like, I'm going to read it all now. This is a great story, but it's hard to look at.
That's the most frustrating thing about it, because I'm like, I know this is an amazing story, and I know it because I've read it before, and I've listened to people talk about it before. I'm like, yeah, it's like the great detective story for Batman. Mm-hmm. Like I was saying about how I think Batman looks the coolest when you show as little of him as possible, the shading in that book is really cool. Every time they obscure the characters, the set pieces and things it's really tonally just awesome to look at. But as soon as I see the faces, I was like, they're so ugly. And I saw Selena Kyle, I was like, wow, you are so ugly. And I just don't like it.
Let's see, I'm Googling Scarecrow comics. I'm curious to see if there's any that I can think of that are listed here. I don't think I've read any of these, and like I said, the only one I can really think of that I really know is the Arkham Knight video game. It's okay. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a Scarecrow lover or anything, but I feel like most other villains, I could at least name one story that I'd be like, yeah, he's really good in that.
He deserves some love.
Yeah.
I guess I'm gonna cap it off there. That was the third episode of Batman the Animated Series. Nothing to fear. And again, I was joined with my friend Kevin. Thanks for being here.
Woo!
Yes. And I'll see you next time with The Last Laugh.
Yes.
All right. See you next time.